You ready? Okay, here we go. They haven't seen these questions, so this is like scaring them probably. So I'll try to give some easy ones to get us rolling here. I want to start by asking you to think about the last 3 years. You know, it's been a challenge for all of us, right? So as you think about all those different challenges that, oh, by the way, sorry, a little housekeeping thing, I didn't tell them yet. There's one microphone, so you'll have to just share the microphone, okay? As you think about the challenges of the last 3 years, and particularly those of you who see clients, or as in the academic world, whichever, at the top of that, you could have little labels, you know, political challenges. We had the election, which caused a lot of challenges. And I'm thinking about ministry for a moment here, for those of you who are in church world, nonprofit world, where this may have come to the surface for you. And any political issue. My first thought about this is just in general, how did you see this present itself as you saw clients or as you engaged students? How did that in any way, how did those challenges present themselves to you? Melissa, you have the microphone, so if you want.
Is it? It's working.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know where to hold it.
You're
Is that
fine.
okay?
That's great.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
When I think about the last few years, one layer of what happened during and post-pandemic was it was either all somebody could talk about, my clients, that nothing else interfered. Therapy was on hold just to process, you know, not even through their stuff, just to process, I need somebody to talk to. Or they absolutely froze. I realized after the pandemic was over that I was one of the freezers. I couldn't afford, is what I told myself afterwards, to really process what was going on. So for me, and for my clients, when politics heated up, that kind of woke a lot of stuff up, and continues to, I think. Let me pass this on.
As you think about this, may even think also, like, how did it present itself in different generations? Like in the 20-year-old versus the 40-year-old. You know, just think about that as well.
So I'm Ross, and I do a lot of family work, and because of that, I think it brought a lot of the family, both positives and negatives, out. Like families that, just like we were talking about resilience earlier, you know, had good judgment about the things that we need to continue to do, kept doing it. Ones that didn't and really shut down and became isolated struggled more. And so, and then on that community level, the isolation, I think, is the big impact, which opened up opportunity to get involved in things that aren't healthy for all ages. And so that element we're still dealing with. And then the final element I'm dealing with right now that we just walked through was with school-age kids, the stress now a year post of them removing grace, kind of removing and raising the expectations back to where they were through the school systems, put a lot of pressure on kids and families. So a lot of parents were really worried about their kids succeeding, and that became the priority rather than what was really healthy for them at the time.
Before anyone else speaks, I didn't take time to tell y'all who's who. Sorry about that. On the screen you see names, and actually Dale, Dr. Fox is sitting in for Dale. So Melissa's here on the end, and Megan now has a microphone, and Ross was just talking, Dr. Fox and Helen Neal. Thank y'all for doing this, by the way. They're like, what are we doing? Why did you tell me I'm doing this? What's going on? So, Megan, I know you work with Florida Early Childhood, so what's coming to your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so my name is Megan, as he said, and I work for the Florida Center for Early Childhood. And my specific role is I work with the children and families over with Head Start and Early Head Start. So what I'm actually seeing are all those COVID babies right now. You know, there is a definite impact because those children, you know, were home completely with their families for that entire time. So we're seeing a lot of the impacts of what that isolation looked like and the trauma that that had on those families and on those children, and what that now looks like as they're reintegrating into these social environments. And this is, why play therapy is so important. Because, they don't have those communication skills, and they don't have the things that they need to be able to tell us what they're feeling and what those big emotions are, and, and beyond just what's happening for their children, families, as you were saying, the impact that it has on the families, families who have older children. And, I work with a family who their child is transitioning into kindergarten, and she's afraid to send her child to kindergarten. So working with these families on these big transitions, because it's hard for them now, because they're not sure how to make these transitions anymore. So there's a lot that goes into it.
My bad, sorry. Can we just sit there for a second? When you say you're doing that kind of work transitionally with them, can you give us an example of what that looks like?
Sure. So in my position, I work with the children and the families one-on-one, but once that child goes to kindergarten, I can no longer be that child's therapist. So they either have to go into outpatient, or then they go to school-based mental health. So the child is then transitioning to kindergarten. So working with the family on a transition plan. So what is that transition plan, and where is that child going to go to kindergarten? So working with the family much sooner than August. So starting this conversation in, let's say, March, and working with them, okay, like, this is happening. Where are they going? What is the route that you want to take? And we all know that there's red tape when it comes to the school system. And I know, and I'm sure that everybody here knows, that it's not so easy to get school-based mental health in the school, because the child has to be identified. And if they have trauma, sometimes that trauma is not just it's not just an externalizing behavior. There might be an internalizing behavior. So the school might not see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. But if it's not evident in school, that means that that child is not going to receive services. So if I have a kiddo that's on my caseload that has trauma, and I know that they have trauma, what are we going to do? What is our plan? So maybe that kiddo needs outpatient services, or we need to figure out a different plan, because I know that they're not going to receive school-based mental health services. So working with the family on, okay, like, what is our plan going to look like as they go into that next step, and making sure that they have the support that they need.
Awesome, thank you. I'll switch gears for you, and we'll start thinking a little more along the theme of integration. So for the two of you, and then we'll come back around this way. As you think about integration, spirituality, and mental health, two thoughts. What are the biggest challenges? And then what are the highest opportunities to integrate spirituality and mental health? So start with biggest challenges of integrating spirituality and mental health.
Well, I guess coming from my perspective, I'm the chair of a counselor education department. So a lot of my work focuses on training students, educating students who are going to be master's level counselors when they leave our program, to do their post-licensure training, et cetera. And I think one of the greatest challenges is simply space in the curriculum to be able to talk about spirituality. There's a little bit of opportunity in certain courses, but the way that the training process works currently in mainstream mental health counseling is that this is more of a chapter, maybe, in a diversity textbook that students may or may not actually get coverage in a course. And so the great challenge is space. Once there's an opportunity, though, and a model in place, and there are models to infuse it in other ways, once people start actually getting exposed to it, I have found that they are very curious about it. And that's one of the great, I think, opportunities, is the curiosity that people have around core universal questions that we all have, big questions about our lives. Most people spend some time over the course of even just the past year thinking about, why do we suffer? Is there meaning in suffering? What will happen when I die? And those are all the great opportunities for us to explore. How does that then interact with people's anxiety? How does that interact with the way they choose a career path? So there's incredible opportunities to have these conversations. And so there's a lot of ways that we could be doing that even more, if I could put it that way.
So hang on to the microphone. You said the word curious.
Yeah.
So what is the role that curiosity plays in this?
Yeah.
What is that role?
I think a lot of people are curious about their own upbringing. A lot of mental health professionals come from family upbringing, either that lacked exposure to religion and spirituality, or had a negative experience. And this is a way in which that they will engage in their own healing and also work with other people to work through religious crises, religious traumas that they've experienced. So this is a little bit of like a self as therapist curiosity, that this is my journey, and I also want to maybe prevent other people from experiencing the negative effects that I have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Do you have a thought you want to share this second?
Just a quick one.
Yeah, go ahead.
About the spirituality.
Yeah.
We started, sorry about that. We started, I'm with Sarasota Strong, and we just kind of do an information teaching people about trauma. So we started in the churches in Newtown. So that was one thing, because you go in there and you're in the churches and it's all spirituality. It's about Christ, it's about demonic spirits. So they didn't want to hear about mental health, because that's a stigma. Nobody wants to think, the first thing you think is that I'm crazy, or that you don't want anybody. So they didn't want to go in to getting any help. So that's a problem when, that was kind of, I guess, a leeway. But what I started doing was stop talking about their mental health and start talking about their past and, trauma, things they went through. And they said, well, then, I got nervous with that. I said, that could be a little bit of mental health stuff. Now, that's where that thing affected your mental health. So it was even educating people on what mental health is, because just because you go say mental health, that doesn't mean they know what it is.
Thank you for saying that. And that leads me to one of the other questions that was submitted regarding intergenerational trauma. That was probably, as far as volume of people, the talks in the last 2 hours, that room was packed. Those of you who had to walk out of there and, find a different air-conditioned room, that room was packed. So let's talk about that for a second. Okay. This question that was posed was, how far back would you say intergenerational trauma goes?
Since the beginning, since Adam and Eve.
Right?
Be real.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Cain and Abel. Mm-hmm. Trauma, we don't even think about that. That this has been forever. But now we're getting to understand it and getting some help. I think that's the key that we're leading to now, especially in the church.
So along that line, and we can you can start and then we can pass it down. Stay on this question, because on the same topic. So in educating people and bringing that awareness about intergenerational trauma, what are the key elements, what are the key talking points?
One thing that even in the class she said and that I experienced myself, families are getting along better because it's changing. You can break that cycle. Even though it's like my thing was domestic violence was really bad in my family, alcoholism, and keeping secrets, not telling your stuff because, what's done in this house stays in this house, but it's killing you on the outside. And with my children, I was open because I realized that didn't work for me because I ended up having nervous breakdowns and everything else, trying to hold on to all this stuff that wasn't working for me. So I started telling my kids, you cry. I told my boys, cry, it's okay. You know how you tell boys, don't cry, boys don't cry? Cry, baby, cry. You know what I'm saying? Break that cycle. Let that out because that's why men have heart attacks. You hold all this stuff in. So trying to break, I learned that that's the greatest gift you can give to that next generation is to try to break those things that are intergenerational stuff that's being passed down.
Any thoughts, Dr. Fox?
I just think of Richard Rohr's phrase, and I shared this in our talk earlier, that we either transform our pain or we transmit it in some way. And so whether or not that's intergenerationally or within a family system or my own experience, taking seriously the ownership for the pain that I have gone through, and also recognizing that that's not the final statement of who I am. That who I am goes beyond that. It's part of it, but it goes far beyond whatever I've done or not done, or whatever has been done to me or not done to me.
I'm going to move on to a different question, but do any of the three of you have something to add on this question? You don't have to.
I mean,
just
I
ask.
can or I can't. So you tell me.
If you had a thought, do you have a thought?
I mean, I always have a thought.
Well, please share, Megan. Please share us your thought.
So I do a lot of family work. So I work a lot with families, and what I always try to do, because I've got my own trauma as well, but I do family groups, and what I have found to be really effective is just letting them know that, because I have a lot of families that, like you said, they're wanting to break this cycle, but letting them know that they're not alone, that there's so many people who are maybe they don't have the exact same trauma, maybe they're not feeling the exact same way, but they're still struggling, and it's okay. Like, sometimes we struggle, and that's okay, but there is support, and we're here, I'm here, and sometimes just knowing that there are resources available, that is the number one thing. And sometimes people just don't even realize that we have resources, and so they're there on the, dying on the outside, right? Because you just don't realize. So anyways, just knowing what's available in our community, because we have so many great things in our community.
No question. And hang on to the microphone. What she just said is true, because this is just a smithering. The expo here, we have 10 or so nonprofits represented here. We got dozens of nonprofits in our area who are helping provide resources for what you're talking about. Yeah. All right, let me take a little bit of what you were just saying and lead us into this other question that was posed. And this, I'm staying with you because of play therapy kind of thinking. And it asks this: what exercises can people do to integrate body awareness to encourage healing from trauma? So body awareness to heal from trauma.
And are you sure you want me for this?
If that's okay. If somebody else has a thought about that, go ahead, Ross.
I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can start.
All right, so let's start with neurology. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're struggling with everything we're presenting is that there is really healthy interaction. And what's happening is whether it's COVID or videos, the phones or anything, it's unhealthy interaction. So one of the things that's happened in my office, and this relates to trauma, so I'm going to share a secret, anyone that works with kids, when they're active doing something they enjoy, then they don't censor themselves. So if you want to work with trauma, then you're going to find the things that really each child is into, and that translates into them opening up. The neurology behind that is when they're physically engaged in something, their brain is more active. I could go into all the different parts of the brain, but the bottom line is if we're just talking to them, we're only using a small part of their brain. And that's true for adults. A lot of times I'll do a play activity or a craft activity with the kids during the day or in the afternoon, and then I'll have adults come in and they want to do the activity. One of the recent ones was marbles. How many of you have played marbles? Thanks to me, a few of the therapists out there. I was shocked that I had so many parents, I'm not talking about the kids, that had never played marbles. So if there's a cause that could be picked up, it's go back to the classic activities that engage your brain, and then kids relax because you're engaging them on kid level, and then they open up.
So that would explain why art therapy is helpful, why music therapy is helpful, anything that's engaging a different part of the brain, right?
Yes.
There's specific ways it is
Yes.
with those. I mean, each of them you could get into what part of the brain,
Sure.
which is awesome to
Right.
look at too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment. I'd like you all to just think about something that makes you anxious not the most anxious you've ever been, just a little bit anxious. Y'all got it? Y'all nodding your heads? You've got something? It's not usually too hard to come up with something that makes us anxious. Now I'd like you to stretch your arms out or stretch them this way. Maybe close your eyes. Feel your chest expanding. Something.
We don't know each other that well yet.
Something is already starting to happen inside you. Number one, you were willing to do it. So you were able to set aside a certain level of anxiety. That kind of anything that opens you up is expansive and is healing. It can happen in play. I mean, it happens all the time. There's just the quickest example that I could think of. If I could just say one more thing.
Go ahead, yeah.
I see mostly seniors, which I wish I'd mentioned first because it colored my response. But because I see seniors, the opportunity in the pandemic time for them, I mean, it was a terrible time for a lot of them and they were very lonely, but it also caused them to become introspective and look at these themes in their own lives of what worked, what didn't, what was the family pain, what's the pain that they're carrying. And they were, by and large, really able to be very vulnerable about it. Like, I'm in the last maybe 10 years of my life and I want to settle these things for my family. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
That's great. And I want to use your little exercise there to take us to a different question. And this, anybody here, can answer this. I know Ross just gave a talk on healing from church hurt, so this is focusing on that topic. Speaking of being active, working out some things, what can we actively do to be a part of the healing from church hurt? I'll say it again. What can we actively do to be a part of the healing from church hurt?
I'm just going to take a stab from maybe a little side direction. We can be open, honest, and vulnerable, appropriate to the relationship that we have with whoever's experienced the church hurt.
Yeah, a word that I didn't mention in my workshop is so succinct, and that's faithfulness. The action is to think about the faithful people in our life that we can work it through with. So it's what I think makes counseling special. I know we're not putting a spotlight on counseling, but having those safeties around that experience gives people a chance to really know that, hey, this is going to be a situation where we know that it's like a container holding the struggle, and we need relationships like that. And so, from a faith view, it's the 2x2 principle. The opposite is true, is when we're isolated and alone in dealing with things, or we spin out. When you're hurt in a church, a lot of times you'll spin out, and that creates more problems because you're disconnecting rather than connecting.
Yeah, and I'll give you all time to add any thoughts here. I just want to pause here for a moment and say, everyone in this room, you're being active just by being here today, from my viewpoint. You're helping us do exactly what the objective is, and that is to integrate faith and mental wellness. And that, if I were to ask, I'm not going to ask this question by a show of hands, but the majority of people in this room probably have some level of church hurt somewhere in your history. So the fact that you're here and engaging is part of the activity. Would you agree with that? Okay. What other thoughts about this question? What can we actively do to be part of the healing from church hurt? Go ahead.
This is out of my scope.
Dr. Fox?
Well, as a former missionary kid and pastor's kid, this is definitely something that's been my life journey, really, because a lot of kids I grew up with eventually left the church over this question. And so I think one thing you can actively do when I think of these stories is you can be open to and allow that person to have that journey for themselves. It's a very scary thing to do, I think, because we know that this is a very important question for that person. And it's a very important question for us, otherwise we wouldn't be in the church. And we know the value of it. So being open to that person's journey and also being open to how their journey, I think, can help us grow too, to be more sensitive to where that hurt may have come from, how maybe we have contributed to that hurt in either ways we're aware of or not, but in openness to wherever that might take the person.
Oh, you would do that one. Well, with me, I've had church hurt, and the first thing that came to my mind, God says, love even your enemies. So I started thinking about separating that behavior of that person from loving that person, and that kind of too, and realizing that we're in church, we're human beings that are going to make mistakes and that are going to have their own opinions and not going to always be as holy as we think they should be. So just understanding that, I think it takes the sting out of it, and you feel more empathy for them instead of being angry.
That's great. So this is our final question. We can keep the microphone in this end, and then we'll let you all. It's a good try. Good try. And we'll move it on down, and we'll wrap this up. So the last question is a little shift here, thinking about, I think, particularly the nonprofits who represented here. So the question is, how do you balance the fine line between spirituality and the policies or mission of your agency when talking with clients and colleagues? I'll say that one more time, just let it sink in. How do you balance the fine line between spirituality and your agency's policy or mission when talking with clients or colleagues?
Well, our organization started out with Christianity because we're started out from the Center of Religious Tolerance. So we're umbrellaed under that. So we were already working in churches. So we were blessed. And I was in another organization which was strictly, like you say, when you go into schools, there's no religion. So I felt like when I got with them 4 years ago, I finally was walking in my true purpose, where I could share in this organization my religion and speak scripture even when I'm doing my workshops or whatever I'm doing. So
if you didn't have that freedom,
then I have to go back to where I was in the other one, where I couldn't say it. And it was hard. But a lot of times, even when we're believers, they'll tell you, because I've been in jails and prisons, and they say, "Oh, Miss Helen, I know you're a Christian." I said, "I didn't say I was a Christian." They say, "No, but we could tell." Mm-hmm. So you can live it and show it without bringing the word or bringing the scripture out.
Nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I also am the executive director of my parish's counseling center, and the way that we deal with this is we're connected to a church. It's clear in our mission who we are. Our mission is, in response to the love of God, is to provide counseling services to everyone who needs it, regardless of their ability to pay. And at the same time, we're not clergy. We're not spiritual directors. And so it's a both and. This is what inspires us to do what we do, and we're not expecting people to become a Christian at the end of a counseling session or a relationship. And it is also, a response to the work God has done in our lives as well. So it's in the both and, but also being clear that we are not clergy. We are focusing on people's mental health and well-being. And if we do need people to step in for spiritual direction or confession, there are resources for that. And so that's how we balance it. It's not always easy because it's hard to also tailor expectations of what clients might expect from a church counseling center as well. So we have to be very flexible, and I would also say creative.
We are not religiously affiliated in any way over at the Florida Center. However, we do, when we are, doing our assessments, that is a portion of our assessment, making sure that we are being culturally and religiously competent and sensitive to each and every one of our clients, making sure that, we know what is important to them and making sure that we are being sensitive to their needs. And, I guess that's the best way that I can answer that, because, we
I think that's really helpful because you're putting the client first and letting them speak into, like you just said, where they are. Ross?
Yeah, so I've had over 20 years working in settings like Child Protection Center that was government run, and so hard a line between faith and the clinical. And the thing that I came to understand is that they're really complementary. So if we really rest on the principles like love, so psychology calls it unconditional positive regard, right? But those complementary principles are deep. So along with integrating, we need to see what is complementary and what isn't, and be able to, use good judgment about that. We lose our voice if we do things in a way that are confrontational, which is the opposite of that. It's a clash. So I found good success with that because God is wiser.
He keeps reminding me of that. God does. I think part of your question was about how do we talk with our colleagues and so. And I think one of the blessings for me about working at Samaritan, and I've been there a long time, is that from the beginning to now, and I know it will continue, we work very hard to be congruent so that our missions, our policies, the way we carry out the sort of rules and regs about being a counselor at Samaritan or even being a client at Samaritan, we try to be very congruent with our faith mission. Doesn't mean it has to be our client's faith mission. And that's just been a huge benefit to me, to my clients. They don't all want to talk about their faith, but I'd say 97 or 8% do. And so they tell me over and over how having the freedom to know that the whole agency tries to be congruent is really nourishing for them. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Just, sort of put the ball in their court, the client's court, and the colleague's court. And if they do, they do. If they don't, they don't.
Right.
Thank them for being our panel.